This episode of Literary Treks is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and to help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading, in case I got bored.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Literary Treks, your dedicated Star Trek books and comics show. I'm just one of your hosts, and joining me, as he does every week, is the Quark to my Rom, I'm going to say, Bruce Gibson. Bruce, how's it going today?
I'm sitting on a pile of gold-pressed latinum, and I'm very happy. I feel all the riches of the universe are beneath me.
Yeah, well, I'm the Negus, and you can't take that away from me.
Moogie!
Awesome. Well, today is going to be a Ferengi episode of Literary Treks because in the feature we're talking to authors Paula M and Terry J. Erdmann about their recent Star Trek Deep Space Nine ebook novella, and that is I, the Constable, which is features Quark and his gang, but also Odo quite heavily. So that'll be quite fun. We'll get to that in the feature. But first, we've got some news this week and a cover reveal, which is always a lot of fun. Maybe a little less fun now that Matt's not here and not singing anymore, but still pretty cool.
We're going to judge a book by its cover. No, I can't do it. Not like Matt did.
Oh, man, that was almost... I was having flashbacks there. That was pretty good. But yeah, we've got the cover reveal and, of course, the back cover blurb to the next Discovery novel by Dayton Ward, and that is Drastic Measures. And that one's going to be coming out, I want to say, beginning of February 6th. That's right. February 6th, 2018 is the release date for that book. And yeah, let's start out by taking a look at this cover. What do you think of the cover here?
So we have Captain Giorgio and Lorca on the cover, and they're in their uniforms like we see on Discovery. So I like the cover, and we see the actors. They look like, they probably took publicity photos and, put them together or whatever. So it's got, Starfield or something in the background. So I tweeted at one point when Dayton Ward put this out on Twitter about the cover, I said, so does this mean that, because this book takes place 10 years before Discovery, the TV show. Mm-hmm. I said, so does this cover mean that they still had these types of uniforms 10 years prior to Discovery? He did not answer.
Interesting.
Well, he doesn't read my tweets, I'm sure, so no. But anyway, I don't think that this really means anything because it's the actors as they look now. It's more current day, and it's trying to, look like the show. But it looks, I like it because we're seeing the two captains together that we never saw them together on the show. So it's kind of cool to see them on a cover like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to say I like this cover more than I liked the cover for David Mack's book, Desperate Hours. I've got a comment on that cover, that ridiculous shot where they have women pose a certain way so both their butt and their face are in the picture, and no one ever stands like that, and it looks ridiculous.
Right. But we don't have any butts in this one.
No, I mean they're standing kind of like normal human beings, which is great. Although I think maybe the look on Captain Georgiou's face is saying something like, Lorca, you're in my personal bubble, back off. But other than that, it looks pretty normal.
Yeah, and he doesn't look too happy, but he's holding, his rifle like he's ready to attack something.
Yeah, does Lorca ever look happy though? I don't know.
Only when he's petting the Tribble in his office.
Aw, there's an image. I want to see fan art of that now. Lorca just like in his quiet time petting his Tribble. Anyway, so we've got the back cover blurb here as well. It is 2246, 10 years prior to the battle at the Binary Stars, and an aggressive contagion is ravaging the food supplies of the remote Federation colony Tarsus IV and the 8,000 people who call it home. Distress signals have been sent, but any meaningful assistance is weeks away. Lieutenant Commander Gabriel Lorca and a small team assigned to a Starfleet monitoring outpost are caught up in the escalating crisis and bear witness as the colony's governor, Adrian Kodos, employs an unimaginable solution in order to prevent mass starvation. While awaiting transfer to her next assignment, Commander Philippa Georgiou is tasked with leading to Tarsus IV a small, hastily assembled group of first responders. It's hoped this advanced party can help stabilize the situation until more aid arrives, but Georgiou and her team discover that they're too late. Governor Kodos has already implemented his heinous strategy for extending the colony's besieged food stores and safeguarding the community's long-term survival. In the midst of their rescue mission, Georgiou and Lorca must now hunt for the architect of this horrific tragedy and the man whom history will one day brand Kodos, the Executioner. Dun dun dun.
Dun, dun, dun. Don't you feel like every time we read these covers or these back covers, we have to go dun dun dun?
It's just it's that moment. You have to do it.
I'm excited about reading this. I feel like maybe we talked about this before, but I thought originally when I heard this novel was going to take place 10 years prior to Discovery, I thought maybe it was going because Dayton hinted that there's an event at that period of time that we all know of that's going to fall into this, and I mentioned to him that I thought it would be the launch of the Enterprise, the USS, the original Enterprise, USS Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
And
which was a good guess, and I think I was on board with you.
Yeah,
with that too. I was like, that's got to be it.
Yeah, he's like, okay, sure, yeah, whatever. But it's now this totally makes sense. Kodos the Executioner, which doesn't mean we can't see both, but we've had some other books with Kodos the Executioner during that whole time that this tragedy happens on this planet on Tarsus IV. So I like the fact that we're going to see that time frame again in this event, but have the two captains who aren't captains yet be involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely, it's really cool, again, tying it to an event from Star Trek canon. And, this is a major formative event in Star Trek. I mean, we've got a young James T. Kirk who is there and bore witness to all of this as well. So, really cool. I'm really looking forward to this one. And, Dayton is a great author. So there's some really good stuff, I think, going to be in this novel.
Well,
really looking forward
and
to
this book and the previous one that David Mack wrote, Desperate Hours, both of these are Discovery books that tie into TOS.
Mm-hmm.
We saw the Pike crew interact with the Shenzhou crew, and now we're seeing these two captains during an event that we've learned about in TOS that had a young Kirk. So there's those connections there. So those are kind of fun. Those are the kind of things we can't necessarily get in the TV show as much. So, nor should the TV show go too far into connecting directly to TOS. I like, the Easter eggs and some connections, leading into things, but not just a direct story that takes place with what we learned of something at TOS.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's something the novels have always done, is tie disparate bits of continuity together. So yeah, it's really cool to see that kind of stuff taking place here as well. And plus it's a blue cover. I really like blue. That's a nice color.
Blue's my favorite color. What's yours?
mostly blue. I'd have to say I really like some purple as well. Purple's a really nice color.
All right.
But, pretty much that end of the color spectrum.
I'm with you right there. Blue and purple. Yes, I'm with you.
Excellent. Well, we've also got a couple of comics to take a look at this week. We've got Boldly Go number 14. We'll start with that one. This is the second issue in the Idic miniseries in the Boldly Go series. Bruce, what are your kind of initial thoughts on this one?
Okay, that didn't sound too good the way I did that. No, I like it. I liked it better than I thought because, well, first of all, I went into it because I looked at the cover and we see the crew as the opposite gender from what we know them to be in the Kelvin timeline, which we've already explored that before in a previous issue in Star Trek Ongoing. So we're returning to that. And when I look at the cover and I see the female version of Kirk, Spock, McCoy, I just felt like, didn't we already do this? And so I thought, well, okay, I'm going to read this, of course. And once I got into it, then I started to worry even more because it seemed to focus. I thought maybe the cover showed the female versions of them, but I thought it's probably not the focus. But then when I started reading it, it seemed to be the focus. But then we got off of them when we started to explore not just this crew and the Kelvin timeline crew that we know, but other Enterprise crews from other dimensions, and it started to get more and more interesting to me. So starting off, I was a little hesitant of return to something we've done before, but then it really started to get different, and I was really starting to enjoy it once I got halfway through it.
Yeah, we definitely do see a bunch of different universes. I kind of like that we start from the perspective of a universe other than, I just about said the Prime timeline, but it's not. It's the Kelvin timeline. So many timelines now. And then, of course, this is messing it up even more. There's so many different parallel realities here. It's kind of neat that we started in a perspective other than the one that's, the main one for this series. But yeah, like you said, then we get into all these other universes. And there's one in particular that is really odd. We get the... I guess the Tron androidy, I don't know what's going on version of the Enterprise, where they're, for example, the Captain Kirk of this one is commanding unit JTK-1701 of the Starship Enterprise, and he almost seems to be like a part of the ship, like they're growing out of the workstations and the chairs. And I don't know, was that too weird, or are you fascinated and want to learn more?
It was too weird when I saw it, but as it went along, I started to get a little more interested in them. They do seem, I wouldn't say they're androids, but almost like Terminator 2.
Yeah,
that they're silvery type beings that can morph, because if you look at Kirk on the bridge when we first see them, the lower half of his body is the chair. He's not sitting in a chair. It's like it's almost like a shape-shifting thing like Odo would do, where it's like, I'm becoming the chair, but then still seeing the top torso and head of him molded into it. But then later we see him walking around like a humanoid. So, I mean, it's interesting. And that's the thing. I like to see different things that we hadn't seen before. And this is certainly different. I'd like to maybe learn more about them and where they come from and why they are the way they are in an upcoming issue. So I hope we get to explore it a little more.
Yeah. Well, with this issue, I feel like this is kind of set up for what's to come. There's kind of a lot happening in this story that we don't really get an explanation for. So they're kind of in this area of space, and all these various enterprises are appearing or have appeared, kind of like the episode Parallels in TNG, all the different Enterprise Ds there. In this case, it's all the different Enterprise 1701s and also the Endeavor.
But we don't,
because
right.
Yeah, our guys aren't on the Enterprise anymore.
But we don't see the Prime Timeline Enterprise among all these Enterprises, unless I missed it. But I mean, I looked and looked at every ship thinking, okay, which one's the Prime Timeline one? And we don't see it.
Yeah, I was hunting for that too. I was wondering if they would pull that in, but yeah, no such luck. So we get kind of a continuation of the story of the orphan Kirk, who was raised in Klingon society, and Simon Grayson, I guess, which is that reality's version of Spock, who has rejected his Vulcan side. And, you know, we get little bits of their story, and then there's a big kind of flash, and there's a surge in, and it trails off, and there's a big flash, and various characters find themselves in various places with different people from different universes. So we get Captain Jane T. Kirk, who is the woman version of Captain Kirk, with the Kelvin timeline McCoy and the Tron Terminator 2 version of Uhura. And they're on Vulcan, it seems, and they're in a reality where Nero destroyed Earth instead of Vulcan.
Right.
And
so this isn't New Vulcan, this is Vulcan, and they refer to New Earth.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, our Kelvin timeline Kirk ends up with the Terminator 2 version of Sulu, and who else? And the Simon Grayson, that universe's version of Spock, and they're all together in some sort of jungle locale, and it's kind of, I'm not sure what's going on exactly.
No, it's like something is pulling a member from each of the different universes and putting them together. So like the one you just mentioned, eventually we get the female Chekhov showing up, Pavela Chekhov.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got a lot of heavy red lipstick. Just on the one panel, it looks that way to me. But yeah, there's something that's pulling the crews apart and matching them together, and I just want to know what it is and why.
Yeah, and yeah, like I said, and there's a twist ending to this. I don't want to give it away. You guys should check out this comic, but yeah, it very much feels like kind of a middle issue. There's a lot of setup here with, you know, not a lot of explanation as to what's going on. I'm kind of anticipating we'll get that in a later story. It feels like there's an intelligence behind this, like somebody or something has brought them to these places. I could be wrong, but I feel like there's somebody pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Yeah, and it seems like a very Q thing to do, so I don't know if it's Q or Trelane or whoever, but I can't think of anything else besides that. I'm not saying that's what it is. I just, you know, I don't know who would purposely do this, but it does feel like someone is doing this, and it's not just a coincidence.
Well, bottom line with this one, I'm definitely intrigued. I want to find out more, so I would give this a recommend. You guys should pick it up. I don't know. I don't have a lot more to say about it without really knowing how the story ends up getting paid off, but you know, I'm definitely interested, and I'm really wanting to learn more.
Yeah, because this is part 2 of 4, right? Is that what we were saying, or is it 6?
Or 6.
I think it is 6.
Possibly. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not a whole lot to say because it's just a part of a story, a whole story.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, part 2 of 6. So this story is really just getting started. So we'll definitely learn more. We do also have a second comic we're going to talk about today, and this is one I've really been anticipating. This is the first issue of the new Star Trek Discovery comic miniseries, The Light of Kahless. And this one follows the Klingons of Star Trek Discovery and kind of gives some background to their story. And so this one started in a place I wasn't expecting. It kind of starts from the perspective of Vok and L'Rell aboard the Klingon sarcophagus ship shortly after the Battle of the Binary Stars.
Yeah. I was glad that it took place there because we have that 6 month period between episode 2 and episode 3 of Discovery. And now we get to explore what was going on during that period of time with the Klingons. And then also getting backstory to Kuvma and to Voke. And, so we're really starting to, because when I heard about this, I thought, this comic originally, I was wondering if we're going to explore the characters we already knew, or if we were going to explore a period before them that was just about the Klingon society. And it's kind of a mix of both, but it's really focusing more on the characters that we are introduced to in Discovery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of, T'Kuvma had a little bit of some flashbacks in those first episodes of Discovery, and this is really kind of expanding on that and showing kind of basically what it is L'Rell is telling Vok about T'Kuvma's past and where he came from. And it's interesting because, like I said, we get a little taste of it in flashbacks in the episodes of Discovery, but here we really see, him discovering his family's ancient ship and, his kind of start on the path towards becoming the T'Kuvma that we see in those first 2 episodes of Discovery. It's interesting. I find myself actually a lot more interested in this than I thought I might be.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. So looking at, I guess it's page 2, if you want to just go there real quick, because I have a question for you. We see a Klingon ripping at the uniform piece where the insignia was, I'm guessing on Captain Giorgio. Or,
well, I don't,
because it's got a medical, it's a medical insignia.
The little, it's the little actually security or engineering.
Or security.
Little,
you're right, security. Yeah. But that wouldn't be her. Whose is that?
I don't think it is, because we see the uniform later too, and it's very bronze. So I think it's just kind of implying that they're eating a bunch of people that they captured in that battle or something like that. Is kind of my distasteful explanation is my guess anyway.
Okay. Yeah, that could be then. I just wondered if it was Captain Giorgio, but I guess not. But yeah.
I initially was thinking it might be Giorgio, but they must have, and this is getting a little macabre, of course, but they must have picked up, bodies that were floating or something, because we know they were starving for those 6 months as well. Yeah. And my thought actually, in kind of retrospect, is the helmsman who gets blown out into space from the Shenzhou. I can't remember his name. He was a yeoman in David Mack's book, but he was the helmsman in the episode, and I can't remember his name, but he wore the operations insignia.
Okay, that could be him. But you're right. I'm sure it's probably one. They probably did grab a bunch of those bodies, because we saw them use tractor beams to bring the bodies of their dead aboard.
Right.
And so they would probably use the same things to go after the Starfleet officers to bring aboard to just feast on them, which sounds really bad. But the one thing that really stuck out to me about this one is when we look at the past at T'Kuvma, it starts on Kronos. And the reason I point this out is because there's been some speculation from people saying, like, why do these Klingons look so different from the Klingons we know? And one of the things is, well, there's other worlds within Klingon space. So these could be Klingons from different, Klingon worlds, and not necessarily from Kronos. But now what we're seeing here in this flashback, T'Kuvma and other Klingons that look like him are on Kronos. They are from Kronos. So to me, that answers a question that we haven't gotten from the TV series, is where are these different looking Klingons from? Are they from Kronos or from something other planet within the Klingon Empire? And what we find out is, no, they are on Kronos. Yeah,
that definitely seems to be the case here, for sure.
And then, and then we pick up some things too with T'Kuvma as he's younger, as he's being picked on by other young Klingons, their adolescence and his brother, and constantly being picked on, in which we saw indications of that in Discovery. So we see that tie in there, which is a very good parallel to what we've seen of Spock too, of Spock being picked on when he was on Vulcan. So T'Kuvma's past reminds me a lot about Spock, and I don't really understand why T'Kuvma is always the focus of being picked on by these other kids, except that maybe he's a younger brother of his brother and his friends are picking on him, and that's how it is. But I liked how then his sister steps in as T'Kuvma goes into the woods.
Yeah, I'm thinking it has something to do. They make mention a few times that he's smaller than the other kids. I guess maybe he's a little bit of a late bloomer because, when we see him in Discovery, he's not a small guy. He's a pretty big, imposing Klingon. So he must kind of just be a late bloomer, I guess. But yeah, I really like his sister's character. I think she's really interesting. I'd really actually like to know more about her. And yeah, the fact that she's kind of got this group aboard this ancestral ship of theirs and, working towards this goal of going to Boreth and following the path of Kahless is really interesting. I like the beginnings of T'Kuvma's journey here.
Yeah, and that this crew or potential crew of the ship, once they get it off planet, are descendants of T'Kuvma's family's ancestors. These are descendants of almost like, workers or slaves or such of the. It's a fascinating story and perspective of this culture and how T'Kuvma plays into this, and his sister and Kahless. And I guess the thing is, if you're watching Discovery and you have any interest in what's going on with the Klingons in Discovery, you need to read this issue.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, it's definitely more interesting than I was kind of expecting it to be. And I'm really curious to see where it goes from here. I guess just very much echoing what I just said about the last comic we talked about. It's the first in a mini series, so we're setting things up here. But yeah, I'm really curious to see where this journey ultimately where this journey takes T'Kuvma, but how he gets there from here. It's kind of an odd way to phrase it, but I feel like it's really humanizing the Klingons. And I think they would, especially with their rallying cry of remain Klingon, they would really hate to hear me say that. But, it really feels like the writer is setting us up to really empathize with where the Klingons are coming from and where T'Kuvma specifically is coming from.
Right, and how we're learning so much more about their culture and their past, and how they view their ancestors and those of the dead. And, they have the family crypts and the craftsmanship that goes behind that. I mean, we're just digging deeper into Klingon culture, into areas that we've never explored before. And it just adds such much more levels to 50 years of Klingon stories. And we're just creating more and digging more into it. And so it does make them seem more real, because when you get so deep and get so much depth into the society, it just, the complexity of things just makes it feel like it must actually exist.
Definitely. Yeah. World building. And I think the writer and the artists in this issue do a really good job of that as well. So yeah, definitely really interested in seeing where this one goes. And again, you guys should pick this one up because this is pretty cool. So what do you say we jump into the feature? We've got a couple special guests who are waiting to talk. We're waiting to talk to here. Terry J. Erdmann and Paula M. Block, who are the authors of the newest Deep Space Nine ebook novella, I, the Constable. Now, these two have had a long and storied history with Star Trek, and we're really happy to have them on the show. They've been involved behind the scenes with publicity for Star Trek for many decades. You might know many of the nonfiction books they've written. The Star Trek Deep Space Nine Companion, for example, always has a prized place on my shelf and is an amazing piece of work. And they've done many other pieces of behind the scenes stuff for Star Trek over the years. And this is the third Deep Space Nine ebook novella we've gotten from them. So what do you say we jump over to the feature and welcome them aboard?
I am so ready. Let's do it.
Well, November has seen a ton of new Star Trek releases, and the first release that we got a chance to take a look at this month is a new ebook exclusive novella by authors Paula M. and Terry J. Erdmann. Their ebook novellas have been really fun, and this one is no exception. We have I, the Constable, and joining us in the feature today are the authors, Paula Block and Terry Erdmann. Welcome, you guys.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Excellent. We're really happy to have you on.
Perfect. Well, we're glad to do it. The telephone calls are like part of our lives.
Yeah. As is writing.
Excellent. Well, we're really glad that writing is a big part of your life because, like I said, this is another really fun story we've gotten from you guys.
And reading's a big part of our life, by the way. That's what we do a lot of.
We like that.
Actually, we read. We read constantly. It's seldom you see one of us without a book in our hand.
That's what I like to hear. I think the world needs more readers, and the world also needs more writers like you guys.
Well, thank you.
Gee, thanks.
We'd like to think so, but we don't know if anybody else does.
Well, definitely count us among that, and I'm sure our listeners as well. Now, this story in particular, I, the Constable, obviously centers around Odo and Deep Space Nine and his whole story. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the inspiration for this story. What was your inspiration for the basic story of I, the Constable?
Well, most of these novellas start when editor Margaret Clark from Pocket Books gives us a call and suggests, okay, it's time to do another one of these things. And she will often throw out a couple of ideas, and then we kind of interpret it, and we usually kind of go off track, and she says, no. And then we interpret it differently and kind of end up far away from her original premise, but she ends up really liking it.
This time was slightly different from that, though. Paula and I were hoping that we would get to write a third novella. And so we were sitting around at home talking, what could we do? And I think Paula brought up that Quark has a second bar on Bajor.
Right.
And I said, what if he wanted to open another one someplace, like a third one, and like on a moon or something. And then just a few days later, Margaret called and said, what if Quark wants to open a franchise, which was much bigger than just another bar. But we were kind of thinking in the same direction somehow, even though we're on the West Coast and she's on the East Coast, the streams crossed.
Yeah. Yeah, she did mention franchise. So we started thinking about, what kind of trouble could we get Quark in if he got involved with too many bars or something like that. And it wasn't real funny, and we like these things to be funny.
Yeah, I went online and actually I read some legal contracts about how franchising starts, and whether or not, a franchise is generally when the local owner owns the business, but signs up with a major company to carry their product and things like that. It was all really boring. And then Paula one day came up with a key word, and she said, "Frin."
Yeah, I think that might have been partly inspired because Margaret said something like, didn't Quark have a relative who had a bunch of bars? So I started digging into this, and I realized it was his uncle Frin, who was mentioned in, was it Civil Defense?
Yeah, Civil Defense is a Deep Space Nine Season 3 episode. And there's a little conversation that Quark and Odo are talking, Quark's all, almost despondent. He's very sad because he's not doing so good. And I actually have the quote. Would you like me to read it?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Quark says, "A lifetime of scheming and plotting, wheeling and dealing. And what have I got to show for it? One little bar. My Uncle Frin owns 30. And that's it. That's it. And then Paula kind of ran with that and said, let's try to get Quark to take over Frin's bars.
That's great. I didn't even make that connection. I thought it was a storyline that you just made up, but it actually comes from an episode that they have this uncle with 30 bars.
Civil Defense Season 3.
Yeah, we try to involve as many real threads from the show as we can, and probably as few from the established Deep Space Nine books as we can get away with, because we really like to harken back to the show itself. And, so they're on a different space station than they were, when it was on television, and there's some different characters around, but we kind of like it when we get off the station, because then we can just let the characters be characters.
And the fact that Quark has been operating a bar for 15, 20 years or whatever it is, and he only has 2 bars at this point, you really would think that he would have branched out more. So it's about time something like this happens with him.
Yeah, so the information that Rom gives him about their Uncle Frin, opens a whole realm of possibilities to Quark. Except, as usual, Rom has screwed that up for him.
Well, and something that I thought was kind of cool, the recent travel guides by Dayton Ward actually have Quark with franchises on Vulcan and Kronos. So I thought that was almost thought that was a little bit of a tie-in there.
Yeah, it takes place later, though, obviously. Because in our book, he still only has 2. But
I think Dayton, as I recall, Dayton mentioned on Ferenginar that there is... that Frin owns 30 bars. I think there's a little mention of it in Dayton's book.
Yes, he did actually mention that.
Oh, that's really cool. I love, like Bruce said, tying into the series like that, and I didn't catch that either. That's excellent. Well, another way that you guys tied into the series is in the series, Odo becomes a big fan of noir detective novels, reading, the likes of Mike Hammer and that sort of thing. And that kind of made me wonder, what sort of research did you guys do for this story? Did you find yourself reading a bunch of pulp detective novels to kind of set the tone?
Sure did.
We'd read things. Terry's a big fan of the Spencer books, but they don't really tend to go to noir. They're just good mystery tales. But, we'd already liked Raymond Chandler and some other things. Odo specifically was led to Mike Hammer. And we hadn't read a lot of Mike Hammer, so we got ourselves a bunch of anthologies that had his stories, and he's a lot cruder than some of the other writers that were around during the era.
Yeah, Mickey Spillane, who wrote the Mike Hammer books, he's like a second level on the literary scale. The other writers like James M. Cain and those guys, they're all considered really, you study them in college. Mickey Spillane is kind of not that. He's more of a pulp writer, although he wrote more books and probably sold many more books. So it always surprised me that when the writers of Deep Space Nine, the TV show, whether it was Ira or Ron or Robert or whoever it was, had O'Brien give Odo these books. It surprised me that they used Mickey Spillane because it's not the best literature.
But it's fun, and so we decided to come up with a reason why Odo likes it, because he doesn't exactly say that when there is a scene in one of the episodes where Odo mentions to Kira that he loans her one of the books. And he asks her what she thought about it, and they have a real brief little conversation about it. But in the book, our book, we tried to give Odo a little rationale for it, like he likes the real visceral nature of it and the primitiveness of the whole thing.
Well, he certainly has time to be doing some reading because he's not the constable of the station anymore.
No. But he in this book and in the previous book too, they seem to find ways to use him to investigate as a constable, more of a private investigator than a constable. I'd love it if they brought him back and just had him be that on the show, in the book series, because that's what he's best at.
Yeah, it would be nice, but you found a really clever way in this story to actually do that. Not have him be the constable of the station, but have him do that, secret investigation stuff that he does. And of course, involving Quark. I mean, what a great pairing of those two, as always.
Yeah.
Well, we saw right away that, if Quark, something goes wrong in Quark's life, and spoiler alert, Quark disappears. So Ram, of course, being Grand Nagus, would be, really concerned about his brother. And we just thought that Ram turning to Odo just totally made sense. I mean, it just flowed that way.
Well, this is probably a good time. We should warn the listeners that we will be talking about spoilers in this book kind of going forward here. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit about the plot of this story. So, Quark's investigating the possibility of taking over his uncle's business, these bars that he owns, these 30 bars. And in the course of being on Ferenginar and looking into that, he goes missing. And Odo, of course, sets off in pursuit at the behest of Quark's friends to investigate. And I have to say, I love the moment where Odo changes into his constable's uniform. Again, it's like, putting on the trappings of the old office, and it's a really kind of coming home moment for Odo.
We did, I guess the first time we did it was in our previous e-novella was called Rules of Accusation.
Accusation, yeah.
And Paula actually wrote the scene where, as Odo is walking across the bar, he shimmers and suddenly is in his old brown constable uniform. And I just loved it. I mean, I didn't know she was. We sit in different rooms at two different desks and write. She'll do a chapter and I'll do a chapter, and then we hand them to one another to read and to read jiggle and such. And when I read that, I literally got chills. I just said, that's perfect. So we have to credit Paula with coming up with that.
Thanks.
You did it.
Yeah, but so we didn't want to duplicate that in this, but we figured that Odo would say, well, if I'm going to be doing that again, I guess I should get back into my uniform. So he just does it in front of Ro in this story.
I think he's very comfortable dressed that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it almost seems like it would be something that he would put on airs about not being comfortable doing, but at the same time, it feels like he just settles right into that role right away and really does enjoy it, as much as Odo ever lets on that he enjoys anything.
Yeah,
I mean, he's a guy with. Just think of his situation. He's one of a kind in this particular world. He can find others like himself if he goes out there looking, but he's completely alone. So he would have to find something that makes him feel like himself. And I've kind of always thought that brown uniform was it, because he's had it on now. I mean, he's had himself shaped that way most of the time. For, who knows, decades, right?
Yeah, I guess before that, he probably had some sort of quasi-Cardassian uniform before the Federation took over the space station when he was working for Dukat.
Well, it's almost like it's his superhero uniform. It's like he's
yeah.
mild-mannered Odo, and all of a sudden, dun, 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 he's back to superhero Constable Odo.
Yeah, but he's a perfect detective type. He's sarcastic and cynical and all of that stuff. So it just worked really well. And when we started leaning more into this detective mode, we didn't think Margaret would like it, but she actually encouraged it. And the only thing that was a little difficult for us was most of these noir type stories are written in first person. And we thought about doing it, but we immediately, and Margaret too, realized you can't really do a whole Star Trek story in first person because it breaks the mold of Star Trek stories and novels. The only one that comes to my mind was the Cisco story, and even that, he just kind of mentioned some stuff at the beginning and at the end, in first person. But
in what you mean, Pale Moonlight?
Yeah, in the Pale Moonlight, he kind of dictates it. And so we thought about having him do it as a log, and Margaret said, yeah, you can do log entries. I thought maybe we'd do a log entry at the beginning of every chapter, but then since the previous novel in the series had established that Odo got back with Kira, we thought, oh, well, maybe he's writing letters to Kira. And that let him talk in first person. And you can see that he kind of slips a little bit more into the Noir personality as he talks to her.
Yeah, and that mechanism was really interesting. It allowed, I thought, a really interesting way to come into the story. And it reminded me a little bit of the second season Deep Space Nine episode Necessary Evil, which kind of had a noir feel to it as well. And that one took the log entry idea.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Well, that did too, yeah.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't doubt. I mean, that was kind of a detective story. That was certainly looking into a crime. And I wouldn't doubt that one of the writers, whoever during the time that the show was airing, one of those writers probably woke up in the middle of the night and said, that's a detective story. Let's have O'Brien bring in Mickey Spillane stories for Odo. I mean, all of these things had a little birth somewhere, and I think that was I would guess that to have been one of those births.
Yeah, we'd probably have to reread the Deep Space Nine companion to remember all of the little hooks between various stories.
What's that? Is that a book?
Yeah. Someday maybe it'll get reprinted.
Yeah, I recommend you read it. It's really good.
Oh, okay. I'll find it somewhere. Yeah, thanks.
I do have to say, as a little aside, that book still has just an honored place on my shelf. It's so excellent. Anyway.
Thank you.
I'll stop buttering you guys up now.
Well, in case people don't know, Paula and Terry wrote that companion book, so that's why we're mentioning it.
So in the course of Quark looking into this possibility, he witnesses a crime, and basically there's this Ferengi financial manager that has kind of weaseled his way in, and the three wives that Fryn has left behind apparently have kind of given this guy control over the finances, but he pokes around and discovers some things and then is killed. And Quark ends up witnessing this and then is kidnapped by the person behind the death of this guy Hilt, and finds himself tangled up in those shenanigans with Odo kind of hot on his trail. And so that's kind of where the story's going. And through the course of the story, and again, like I said, we're getting into spoilers here, it turns out that one of Fryn's wives is actually behind everything here, which leads me into kind of an interesting thing we wanted to discuss. And Bruce, I saw you put this on the outline here, the idea of female investment in Ferengi society at this point. And that whole aspect of Ferengi culture, how did you guys kind of decide to work that into the story here?
It's Ishka's fault. Ishka did all of it.
It's true.
It's true.
Yeah,
Ishka got hold of the Negus, got hold of Zek, and just ruined everything.
Yeah, we've seen that women are starting to get more of a role on Ferenginar thanks to Ishka's, that's Quark and Ram's mother, meddling in society, and she married Zek, which gave her a big front door to that type of thing. And now with her son, Ram, being the Negus, she can also kind of influence him, and Lita is Ram's wife, so she would probably also want a little bit more female involvement in running things. But we tried to, all these spoilers here, but we tried to set it up to make the reader think that these three women are really backwards Ferengi females. They don't wear any clothes. They wander around and look kind of helpless, but one of them isn't so helpless.
But we were going that direction, and it led us into a lot of real boring text. We had Quark go to Ferenginar, we had him in sort of investigating Friend's death, and it just didn't go anywhere. And so we thought, well, we've got to invent some other characters. We're going to have to bring in a little bit of color on Ferenginar. And so we came up with this character that we named Hilt. He was going to be a financial manager, and Quark obviously could get into discussion with him about Ferengi financing and investment and such. And I mean, it was just reading rather slow. And one day, I don't know why, it just came into my head, and I walked up to Paula in our living room and I said, "What if Odo goes hunting for Hilt, and when he finds him, he's dead?" And it just like clicked, and the book took off. The book became what the book is just from that.
Yeah, and we should point out in the book, we kept the mystery going longer because originally we had scenes with Quark interspersed with the ones with Odo. But then we realized, well, let's keep the readers in suspense a little longer. So we start out with Quark doing his investigating into where Friend's finances are. And at a certain point, something happens, and Hilt gets killed, and we don't know what happens to Quark at that point. He disappears for about 50 pages or 75 pages of the book. And so we have Odo follow his path until he gets to the point where he finds Hilt's body and starts following clues from there on in. And it's not until later that we bring Quark back into it because we realized we were going to have to cover a little bit of exposition anyway to show what actually happened in a number of scenes, and it was best to do it from Quark's point of view.
Yeah, so we wrote what essentially are a few flashbacks, and we tried to write them the way they would be produced as flashbacks on a TV show. So we're always kind of trying to think of lighting and camera angle and all of that, because let's keep in never forget that Deep Space Nine was one heck of a good television show. And so we try to keep it like that.
That's one thing I definitely find with these ebook novellas, especially the ones that we've gotten from you guys recently. It really does have that feel. It feels like a Deep Space Nine Ferengi episode. And I mean that in all the best ways possible, because, it really did feel like I was watching an episode of Deep Space Nine, a lost episode, basically.
And we hope so. That's our intention.
It is. And whenever someone who reviews it says something like that, we're really flattered.
Yeah, it makes us feel, we really hope we can try to capture that. We've never written a TV episode, so we think we're doing our version of that right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a little challenge that's fun. It's really fun to try to do it.
Yeah, I love it. It's great. And there's no commercial breaks. I love that too.
But we watched the show so dedicatedly to do the Deep Space Nine companion that it's not real hard to channel dialogue. Quark is such a vivid character. It would be a little harder to write someone like Sisko, because Sisko's kind of an enigma. You don't always know what he's thinking. But Quark, you always know what he's thinking. And it's not that they're two-dimensional, it's just that they're real predictable.
It's fun capturing their voices. Really, when we're writing, I'm not writing Quark, I'm writing Armin doing Quark.
Yeah.
The Armin Shimmerman, the actor who played him on the show. And we're not really writing Odo. We always have the actors in mind when we're doing it. Same thing, we're doing Lita.
Yeah.
We have the actress in mind. It's just the way, it makes it easy.
Yeah. I wish we could hear an audiobook of them someday. Somebody do an audiobook with those guys in it.
Oh, yeah. With the real actors, the actual actors. That would be awesome. That would be so cool. Well, and I like the fact that when you mentioned earlier that we see Quark for a while and then we don't see him for 50 or 75 pages, whatever. And because Quark is that type that's always looking for a deal, I started questioning if, not just what happened to Quark, but did Quark kill Hilt, or did Quark do something bad? Are we going to see a a darker side of Quark that we never, or he got himself in some really big trouble. So it really kept me guessing and wondering what's going on with Quark, and I kept wanting to get to that point and follow Odo's journey. I mean, we're taking that journey with Odo and trying to put the pieces together, and I love that.
Wow, you're the perfect reader.
We went through a few incarnations of where we were going to take Quark to. One of them, which we didn't play with for very long because it just didn't seem to pan out too well, was kind of doing a version of the Ransom of Red Chief, where the old O. Henry story, where Quark gets kidnapped by some people, but they're really stupid, and he ends up teaching them how to be conniving and make a lot of money at these bars, which they're not doing very well at. But it didn't seem to have enough payoff. So
yeah, I'd forgotten all about that.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Quark kind of teaching people about this world and stuff, at the very end of this story, I find it very interesting. We almost have a newfound philanthropy on the part of Quark. He's basically
he's always been that.
Well,
way.
He's got a little bit of it in him.
Go ahead.
Just takes something to bring it out.
Go ahead, Dan. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, he's basically doing pro bono work on this casino. And I guess, there, like you said, there's always been that aspect of Quark there. But what do you think was kind of behind that newfound generosity on his part?
He's always been a good guy. We saw episodes, the representation of that on the show. There were times. I mean, there was one episode. Was it Who Mourns for Morn, where somebody comes up to him and says, what would we have to pay you to sell enough weapons to kill, 75 million people or something? He won't do it. And they said, well, what if it's only 5,000 people? And he kind of starts, and they said, oh, well, we know what your price is. We know where your line is now. And, but then he couldn't even do that. He never committed a crime that caused harm to somebody else. And I think Quark was always written that way. He's a good guy.
And he's a gray guy. He's not black, he's not white, he's gray.
Oh, he'll misdirect you, to his own advantage. But I don't think he's ever done anybody intentionally done anybody specific physical harm or something like that.
Yeah.
And I feel like
he killed a Klingon, but
yeah.
Yeah, I feel like when he kind of unintentionally does harm and stuff too, he always seems really guilty about it, and kind of like, I'm thinking of Invasive Procedures in season 2. He lets the Trill Varad and his Klingon thugs on board, and then realizes that they're there to hurt Dax, and tries to do his part to rescue her. So yeah, there's definitely that side of him.
Yeah, there's a good. I think I'll say it again. I think Quark is a good guy.
I don't think he's a nice guy, but he is a good guy. And in the end of the story, where we see some supposed philanthropy, even Quark can't say, no, I'm a good guy now. He kind of goes, nah, I'm not getting soft. And the way he pitches it is that, well, I came up with such a good plan for improving this super bar at the north end of Ferenginar that I just can't let it go, So, he could pass it off and say, well, I'm hoping that someday they'll leave it to me or something because they don't have kids. But really, maybe he was doing it for the ladies. It's hard to tell. He just wanted to finish that plan.
Well, I was wondering, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to mention about him questioning, am I getting soft? Nah, but maybe he's denying that, but is he getting soft? Has he been around too many of Federation officers and such, and has become a better guy, or has he always been this kind of nice guy?
He never liked the Cardassians.
No, well, who would? But I think you can't ever let him get really soft. You can always have hints. And, we know he's been in love before. He kind of, he loved the Cardassian woman during the war during the occupation, and he kind of liked what's her name?
The Klingon?
No, the Ferengi girl. The Ferengi girl.
Pel. Well, he liked Pel.
He liked Pel a lot, although she was probably a little too much competition for him. But and the writers of the current book series have him kind of involved with Ro. You never quite know how far it went, but they seem to periodically throw a wrench in the plot so that they're not involved or they are involved, and you can see in this that Ro kind of is conflicted about it. She still likes Quark a lot. She doesn't want to get too involved with him, but she cares about him. And, and when pressed, Quark would admit he cares about her too.
We played with that a little bit in the previous book, Rules of Acquisition. We had Quark and Ro sort of, walking around the table of one another.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I find in this story is the voices of the characters come through really well. I think one of my favorite characters in Deep Space Nine has always been Rom. And reading his words on the page, I mean, I hear Max Grodenchik's voice.
Yeah, we tried.
Oh, man. And just I love that character so much. And I'm thinking specifically, there's the scene where he goes to rescue Quark all by himself because the constabulary won't do anything, and
fool.
Yeah, totally gets in over his head, as Rom does. And I know it's just a ridiculous scene, but it just, you painted such a vivid picture, and it brought a huge grin to my face, where Rom is wildly firing that disruptor around and causing chaos everywhere, and Odo's just kind of standing there like, okay, well, this is happening.
Yeah, let's see where this goes.
Yeah, I mean, what else are you going to do? You would, I would find something to hide behind.
But, Rom does have a soft heart, so, you always know that. He fights with Quark all the time, but he does care about him, even though he tried to get him killed in a real early episode. But they kind of changed his character over the years. He started out just kind of being a manipulative Ferengi, and then the writers on Deep Space Nine were really good. They recognized the way the actors could play the role, and then they went with it, and it was brilliant, So they originally kind of wrote Max Grodenchik's character as a little bit, kind of nasty, and as I said, he in that episode, the Nagus, he almost gets Quark killed, but then they forgive each other because it's a Ferengi thing to do. But so we just kind of went with the way the writers did it, and the writers were the ones, they didn't know that Odo was going to fall in love with Kira until they saw that's the way Renee Auberjonois was playing it. I think that was in Heart of Stone.
Yeah.
But they didn't have any intention of having that happen. But then when they saw the looks that he was giving her and the pain that's in his face sometimes when he's looking at Kira, they realized, oh my God, he's playing that Odo loves her.
We're very lucky. We all of us, everybody who's listening to this, you two on the other end of this line, Paula and I, we're all very lucky. We were able to watch 7 years of these characters develop and the actors develop into what they were doing with them. So we don't really have to develop a lot of that anymore. It exists. So we can just take, our favorite part of Rom, our favorite part of Nog, our favorite part of O'Brien, and use that when we're writing. But and we can recall back to, O'Brien had some hard luck in his life, and we can play with that. But we didn't have to develop it. The writers of the show have done that for us. I love this show.
So it's almost like,
it's a great show.
It's almost like the scenes, like you had the basic framework as you're figuring out of the story, but the scenes almost write themselves because the characters just kind of carry it and tell you where it's going to go.
You hear writers say that all the time, that there's a point where the characters take over, and it really does happen. Even, at our level, I'm not saying that we're literary writers. We're writing tie-in novels about a television show. but it's really true. We start doing something, and we don't even expect it, and all of a sudden, Quark is, there's a spot where they're dragging him down a flight of steps, and there's a spot or up a flight of steps.
Up.
And he says, it'd be easier if you just let me walk. He gets it, and I don't know where that line came from, but it sounded like Quark.
Yeah.
The characters literally take over themselves.
Which isn't to say that we didn't make up stuff. It's fun to go to a different planet because like Ferenginar, because we've got some facts established about it, but there's room to make up other stuff. Like, Terry gave me credit for coming up with one aspect. I'll give him credit. He came up with the wrong side of the tracks on Ferenginar about a slum area where the people who live there have kind of given up trying to become rich, which would be a capital sin on Ferenginar. But, and I just love that there's this slum district on Ferenginar where people just don't try very hard.
It seemed logical to me.
Because they couldn't all be at the peak of capital gains.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you talk about these well-established characters, and that's definitely true, but I have to say you've also come up with some really interesting original characters in this story as well. One that really stood out to me was, and I'm going to make sure to pronounce it very distinctively from Quark, is the kind of police officer on Ferenginar, Quark. And I really like that character, especially his kind of dealings with Odo and Rom.
Yeah.
We figured there would be... Actually, Margaret said to us, look at the movie The Thin Man. Well, I just walked right downstairs and pulled off the novel off of our bookshelf and read the book. Because that kind of comic noir motion picture always had sort of a bumbling cop.
Yeah.
There would be the detective, and he would be working alongside of, but totally independent of, the police department, and the police department would always be one step behind.
Yeah.
And that's why we came up with Quark. We wanted to have a really good cop, but he had to be one step behind Odo's investigation. And that's how that worked out.
And his name was actually, it wasn't just a play on words. His name actually came out of a Spencer novel. There's a police officer in those stories named Quark. And Terry said, well, you can't use that name. And I said, yeah, we can. Make it a virtue.
Excellent. Oh, that's really great. Well, one kind of last thing I wanted to talk about with regards to this story are the kind of fun references that are sprinkled throughout it. There was one that I kind of had to read twice to make sure that it was actually real. There was a very subtle nod to Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven.
Oh, yeah.
It's there. It's there. When it gets in your head, you have no choice. You got to write it down. Now, it can be edited out later. We do that, more often than we should probably. But some of them get edited out, and some of them just stick. And it's there.
Yeah. Well, and we also, I don't know if any of the readers will catch this, but when Odo is the kind of the weird ice creature that catches one of the bumbling sons of the villain, it's basically, it's the tar baby from Uncle Remus, because the guy punches him and his hand gets stuck, and then he punches him with his other hand and his hand gets stuck, and some of the wording was even similar to that, because in the stories with the tar baby, it's just the tar baby, he don't do nothing,
But it's legitimate because there's a word for it. People call them Easter eggs, and if they gave it, if somebody gave it a name, we can do it.
Yeah.
Excellent. That felt really familiar to me, but I for some reason couldn't put that together. That's awesome. There was a reference to Corinthian leather, which I think you guys have done in a past story before as well.
I think we've managed to work it into each of the novellas.
Paula can't leave it alone.
I can't leave it alone because I keep thinking of the way Ricardo Montalban used to say.
I have a true story that must be told. I was working on the movie Star Trek V. We were on the set. And one day, Ricardo Montalban came to the Paramount. We were shooting on the Paramount lot, and one day, Ricardo Montalban came to the Paramount set, and he was going to do some type of a stand-up for some television show or something. And he came over to the Star Trek V office and said, "Can I talk you guys into giving me a couple minutes of hair and makeup? I just need a little bit of like a foundation put on, so I won't." Flash on the camera. And so he did, and he sat down, and 5 or 6 people from the crew heard Ricardo Montalban's here, and they all went over and kind of gathered around him, and so he just started talking. And somebody mentioned Corinthian, the TV ad where he says Corinthian leather.
Rich Corinthian leather.
Was still airing. So somebody brought it up, and he said, "You know where that came from?" He said there was no there was no adjective at all. It was just these leather seats, or maybe it said these rich leather seats. And we stopped and said, what can we do? And we started thinking about it. And he said, somebody that was with us on the commercial crew said, how about something biblical like Corinthian? And he said, we all immediately said yes. And he said, there's no such thing as Corinthian leather. We made it up on the spot and put it in the commercial. Well, how are you going to not use it?
I had no idea. I've been saying Corinthian leather forever. I had no idea that was just made up.
No,
you can look it up. It actually, we look everything up on the internet, and we confirm there is no such thing as Corinthian.
No, I mean, and we were, and there were maybe a dozen of us sitting there while Fernando was having his makeup put on, and everybody it was fascinating, but everybody just burst into laughter. But he said, it had no meaning whatsoever. It just sounded good, so we used it.
So it's our tribute to Ricardo Montalban and Khan and everything else like that.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you could see the look of shock on Bruce's face here because it's really quite amusing. I hadn't heard that exact story, but I had heard that it was not a real thing. So that's
No, I don't know that we've ever written that. You guys may have an exclusive from Terry, but but I heard it directly from the enhanced creature's mouth.
Excellent. Well, I was kind of just wondering if there are any other references that you guys might have snuck in that you want to point to that we might have missed.
Well, whenever we put in a name like any other writer, it usually is based on something or other. In this case, several of the characters' names are based on towns that we've been through, like Hilt. And there's a town not far from where we live that's actually called Weed. And to use it as one of the wives' names, I added an E to the end to make it seem more feminine.
Right. And we have a close friend who has several names, and it's like a hyphenated kind of. And we use several of the parts of her name as the names of the sons of the villain. So that's kind of fun stuff. We invented something on the show, on Deep Space Nine television show. The latinum was established as a liquid, so that it had to be gold pressed latinum in the episode Who Mourns for Morn, and we always heard that that gold pressed latinum came in 3 values. It came in slips, strips, and bricks.
Oh, and that's right. There's 4: slips, strips, bars, and bricks.
Yeah,
that's
right. And we, for this, because we were going to the poor side of town, we invented snips and drips. And that was fun because the words were right there. It was not. It wasn't difficult to come up with perfect other names for the change in your pocket.
Yeah, and that's real small change on Ferenginar.
And when you're writing that stuff, just kind of comes. It just falls into your head.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I liked the idea that it was the two tourists on the transport too, going like, what the heck is this?
Yeah, because the people, the inhabitants, wouldn't get into the word, but I could see a character from another planet finding it very amusing.
Well, I think this is the first time we've ever met really. The other end of society on Ferenginar. Even in our previous books, like in the Rules of Acquisition, we had all of the civic leaders and the industrial leaders all gather at Quark's bar, but we've never seen a low end Ferengi. In that book, we had a couple of villains, a couple of guys who had nothing in their pockets, but they weren't Ferengi. They were I forget what kind of species we had them. But so this is we actually got to kind of explore a little bit of one of the reviews that we saw online about this book. Someone said it was nice to see some really silly world building. So I got a kick out of that.
Yes, that's what we specialize in, silly world building.
Really?
Well, it sounds like we're going to need a travel guide for Ferenginar. I really think we should get that next.
That would be fun.
It would be fun. It would be fun.
So any of you publishers out there listening, we're ready.
Well, or it might end up being Dayton's.
Yeah, or it could be Dayton, because Dayton's already done a couple of them. We'll help them.
Yes, there you go.
I'll throw it in. Dayton Ward, a spectacular writer.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything coming up on the horizon for the two of you, Star Trek related or otherwise, that our listeners should know about?
We kind of took a break after we finished the Labyrinth book last year, because we had to do it so fast in such a short period of time that we just worked ourselves into a frenzy. Well, and then we did the Quark book, but that was like a vacation because it's fun to write. But so we actually turned down a couple books in the last year just so we could relax, because we get burned out a little bit too. But, we really prefer the fiction to the nonfiction because it's, as I said, it's more fun to do. You can make stuff up. You can't make stuff up in the nonfiction books. But, there may be some stuff. There's nothing in the immediate future, but there may be stuff coming up down the road.
We have other writing projects. We write for a local newspaper and things like that, but not at the moment, not in the Star Trek world, no.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I do have to say, last year for Christmas, I gave a friend of mine who absolutely loves Labyrinth. I gave her your guys' book, and she loved it. So I need to borrow it from her and flip through it myself, but I can tell you she really, really enjoyed it.
There's still copies available at the store.
Yes. But, that was fun to write. Yeah, I mean, it was such a pain, but the editor called us up and said, I don't suppose either of you like the movie Labyrinth. And I said, oh, me, because it really, if you talk to people, the guys will say, oh, yeah, that's that movie that had David Bowie in it. But if you talk to a girl, she'll say, oh, my God, I loved that movie when I was growing up. It was my favorite movie. And it really hit a chord with women. So, of course, I was the one who said, oh, yes, I love that movie.
So, Dan, you
I love it now.
You can't borrow the book back. You have to purchase the book here. We have to help our authors.
Yes.
Fair enough.
Well, that would be nice. We don't really get royalties on most of our books because these days the publishing industry, some of the publishing houses still pay royalties, but I would say a good portion of them pay a slightly larger advance than they used to and no royalties.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know
it's
that.
It's just the fame and fortune that we go for.
It depends on the publishing house. So
it does.
We have it both ways.
Yeah, Simon & Schuster still does royalties. Yeah. But a lot of the other ones, especially some of the newer ones that do a lot of those books about the film industry and stuff like that, they tend not to.
Yes, they operate off Ferengi economy.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, if any of our listeners wish to follow you guys and check out what's going on with you guys online, is there anywhere that they would be able to do so?
They can always check us out on Facebook. We're pretty active there. And actually, we got onto Twitter. I've been on Twitter for about 2 years, and Terry finally gave in and got on Twitter last year because Ira Bear did. So, and if Ira Bear would put up with doing Twitter, Terry figured he could.
Yes, and I'm not quite sure if I'm doing something right, but last week I had 113 followers, and today I had 111 followers. So
they come and go.
They come and go.
They do. It depends on what you say. When you say something interesting, you get more followers, and if you don't say anything for a while, they get bored and they leave.
But we're on Facebook all the time, and we both use our middle initials. That's how to find us on Facebook.
Yeah, and they can find us on Twitter too. So and we haven't done anything like establish our own website yet.
Awesome.
I'd have to hire a 12-year-old to teach me how to do it.
Yeah, to set up our website for us. We'd have to hire Mike Akuta to tell us what to do or somebody like that.
Yeah, we would.
Yeah. Mike Akuta, by the way, helped us make up one bit of technology in this book when Odo needed a long-distance communicator so that he could keep in touch with Rom. We knew that on the show, they kind of established both ways. There was one episode where when Odo goes to liquid or something like that, his communicator falls off. But in all the other ones, his communicator was actually part of Odo. So we called up Mike Akuta one day and asked how that would be possible and what would be involved with inventing a new piece of technology that would become part of him. And Mike kind of gave us some workarounds, although I don't know that he expected us to take it in the direction that we did. But that's why we thanked Mike and Denise.
Paula invented that Odo can actually have... Rom invents a visual communicator for Odo to use while he's on Ferenginar. And we rationalized that would be possible because in the movie Star Trek IV, when they're on the way home, the whales are stolen and sent out or are released, and they're out in the ocean, and this Russian vessel is about to shoot them, and the Enterprise crew in their Klingon ship are hovering above them, and Kirk says, put it on video.
Visual.
And put it on visual, and the woman says, how do you do that? And then it just goes to video. They never answered the question, but it proves that we could do it too.
Yeah. So we put it on visual.
Yes,
and even Odo doesn't know how it works.
Excellent. I love how invested Rom is in that too. He's like, oh yeah, I was totally asking about Quark. That's good that he's safe. But how's the visual feed working?
No, really?
Well, no one should ever forget. I mean, Rom is in fact a happily married to a beautiful, intelligent woman. And Grand Nagus, the most powerful Ferengi in the universe, and yet at heart he's an engineer. He will always be an engineer.
Yep. Once an engineer, always an engineer.
You betcha.
Yep.
You betcha.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. This has been a really fun discussion, and thank you guys for a really great story too. This was a really fun.
Yes, we really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you so much.
We enjoyed writing it a lot.
Yeah, there's 3 of them, by the way. This is number 3.
Yep, absolutely. And everyone out there listening, if you haven't picked these up, you should, because they are great reads. So
they're really cheap too, cheap enough for a cheap Ferengi.
And they're intentionally novellas, which means they're short.
Yeah.
So you can read them real quick. And you don't have to invest a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money because they're inexpensive. They're online only, and we assume that you have some way to read them on your computer or your phone or something.
Yep, I read this all in one day, the day after Thanksgiving. That was my Black Friday.
Well, it saved you money, didn't it?
It did. I enjoyed that more than shopping. Well, that was my first time talking to Paula and Terry, and I know, of course, Dan, that you've talked to them before, and they were really fun to talk to, and it's just so great to talk to people who write Star Trek, but also have been involved in other aspects of Star Trek, and just learn little stories and little anecdotes from their experience with the series.
Yeah, I mean, those two, I think I said it to you before the interview, they're a hoot. I always love talking to the two of them. And yeah, they've had so many years of experience with Star Trek. They're always full of really great stories. That little bit of insight into Ricardo Montalban, I thought that was really cool. So,
the Corinthian leather. Oh my
exactly.
Gosh, I didn't know that was made up, and maybe I did and I forgot, but I just that was funny. That really, I'll remember that, of course. But also when we weren't recording, Terry had mentioned that he has been interviewed for the DS9 documentary that's coming out. And it's about and they are using the DS9 companion in that. So he doesn't know if he's going to be in the documentary, but he was definitely consulted or interviewed for it. So he's not sure if he's on the cutting room floor or not, but he did want to mention that he has some kind of involvement, and the companion has some kind of involvement with the DS9 documentary. And I'm looking forward. That should be out in the next few months, hopefully, and that's going to be so awesome to see that.
Yeah, I'm definitely really looking forward to that as well. I contributed to their campaign. The What We Left Behind is what it's called. Yep. So keep your eyes open for that, and hopefully we'll be able to see Terry Erdmann in it as well. And I can't imagine them not using him. He's so much fun to interview, as you've all just heard. So really great stuff. And man, do they ever know their Star Trek. You know, there are a few people that I would be scared to go up against in a round of Star Trek trivia, and Paula and Terry as a combined team would be a very formidable opponent. I don't know if I'd be able to survive that one.
I don't know. Maybe we should try that, Dan, see how you do against them.
Could be fun.
Well, that's what it's all about, is fun. It doesn't matter who wins. It's the fun that counts.
Absolutely. Well, it's been fun talking about getting my butt kicked at Star Trek trivia today, but that's not the only thing we've been discussing on the network. So here's a quick look at some of the other things you may have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, Warp 5.
Did you know that it's the same planet that they're talking about?
No.
Yeah, so
Nuh-uh.
It is. So it's Krios Prime. Like she also comes from Krios Prime, right? So, and the makeup is the same and everything, right? So like that was
okay. I did have that. I'm like, okay. The only thing I can see is that they have the same makeup. That was the only thing, and I was wondering why it was the same. And now I know. Why did I not make that connection? You guys are so smart.
The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
Well, when I was thinking about where do I find peace, I found it so ironic because it seems in opposition to what my fear is. And when I think, gosh, Amy, where am I at peace? It's when I'm alone. And then I was thinking, well, that's stupid because my greatest fear is being alone.
The 602 Club.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about. For the last two films that we've talked about, to say that what I want for Roger Moore is a sense of dignity for the character.
Continuing mission.
Now, on today's show, we have a very special guest who has steered the good ship Enterprise through some perilous adventures, fought off dastardly villains, and wooed the ladies, all in a day's work. He's now vacated the captain's chair by order of Starfleet Command and is now being railroaded in a new career. More about that later. Excuse the puns. Will you please welcome to Continuing Mission, Mr. Vic Mignogna. How you doing, Vic?
That was a very creative narrative you just put together there. I love it. That was quite witty, sir.
Well, it's high praise indeed.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to join you and Zach both. Thanks for having me.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So be sure to check out all of these shows and join the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts.
So, hey, you Apple users out there, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on your iPhone or your iPad or Apple TV or wherever, your desktop iTunes app. And that way you'll get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And you know what? While you're at it, please leave us a star rating and written review. That would really help a lot. And if you're not an Apple user, well, we've got you covered. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, and in most third-party apps. And you can always stream us and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link.
Well, if you'd like to help us keep all of our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/trekfm. That's patreon.com/trekfm to get all of the details. There are lots of perks you can get, including early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more, available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce and distribute these shows each month, and we would really appreciate any support you can give us, and we hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all of the details at patreon.com/trekfm.
So what'd you think of today's show? Well, let us know. You can do that by joining the larger conversation in the Babel Conference. It's our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, Babel, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. And if you'd like to send us an email, you can do that in a form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select Literary Treks, and that will come right to us. You can also find us on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM.
You know, if you really want to keep track of the books you've been reading and what you'd like to read in the future, there's a great website out there to do that, and that's Goodreads. And Literary Treks is also on Goodreads. We have a group there where we have bookshelves with all of our previously covered books, as well as the currently reading section, so you know what's coming up for future shows. And plus, there are great conversations happening about all the books and comics in the Star Trek universe. Just search for Literary Treks on Goodreads and click Join Group, and one of us will let you right in. We'd like to thank Ken Tripp, Greg Rosier, Brandon Chemutala, and Justin Ozer for their support of the Trek FM network, and specifically for being associate producers for Literary Treks. Well, Bruce, when you're not looking to franchise your bars all across Ferenginar and the entire Ferengi Alliance, where can we find you?
Oh, brother, you can find me with Moogie. Sorry, I had to do that. You can also find me on Twitter at Admiral_Rex, and you can find me when we have new episodes of Discovery. The next day, I'm on Live on the Edge with Brandy Jackala. That's part of the Edge feed, and we do that live Monday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. And, we've got a Star Wars movie coming out really soon, The Last Jedi, and I'm on Star Wars Report at StarWarsReport.com. I'm on those podcasts quite often, so take a listen to that as we build up to the new film and listen to what we think about after the film comes out. And, of course, you can always find me in the Babel Conference. And so, Dan, when you're not on Ferenginar interviewing naked female Ferengi about where their investments are, where can people find you?
Well, luckily, I was kind of doing that with the idea in mind that it would be a television show. So there was always, very strategically placed tables and bowls of fruit and such. So, it was awkward, but not nearly as awkward as you would think. But when I'm not navigating those weird, awkward encounters, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Kurtrats. That's Kertrats. You can find me on Instagram at Kurtrats47. You can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/KurtratsProductions. and you can find me on Facebook, usually hanging around the Babel Conference as well. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and until next time,
live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.